back again. uh, you know how it is with hotel internet, and so we're praying. Say some prayers that we will be able to stay on. Um,
Yeah,
we're gonna wait till
if I was hosting, Roger, and down in Fort Lauderdale, I could blame it on the weather. We got this big storm going through
that is
there,
true.
but
That is true. That is true. All right, so
blame it
we're
on
gonna
the
wait for
rain.
a few more folks. They're coming back on.
Yep, and Jason should be back on too here in a moment. But
Okay.
yeah, let's just kind of. Jason was talking about um, just the history of the Second Amendment and the Constitution. Um, the Congress shall not infringe, or the government shall not infringe the right of the people to bear arms. Um, and that has become a big um, crux of the issue of gun control. What right does the government have or not have when it comes to making laws, or in the terms of the Bill of Rights, Constitution, to infringe the right of the people to bear arms? And so I think as we go on with this discussion, Christians and Adventists should have. And I think we want to deal with that too. So just stay with us because we're going to hit that in just a few minutes as well. I am just trying to filibuster here a little bit to give to give Jason some time to get back on, as well as some of the rest of your audience who we lost in that little tech bleak. Um,
Yeah.
Raj, let's talk right quick before we go further about our. Can we talk about the YouTube channel, Pastors Roundtable YouTube channel? The last we were about 100 and something people shy of having 1,000 subscribers on the YouTube channel. So
Correct.
if you are watching now and you have not subscribed to Pastors Roundtable YouTube channel, we would love for you to help us out and go ahead and subscribe. The more people that subscribe, help more people to be able to consume the content that we put out. By the way, it also helps when you do any kind of interaction with the live stream, whether you just hit that thumbs up, even if you hit a thumbs down, that helps. Don't do that though. Don't. Um, Sharing it, commenting along the way, all of those things help more people be able to get some of the great content that comes your way through the Pastors Roundtable. So we'd love for you to interact as you listen to the show, as you share it. That always helps as well. All
Yes.
right, looks like we've
Yes.
got about just a few we've got back now. Hey, and there's Elder Tracy has joined us again. Okay, so Elder Tracy, I know we lost you somewhere in the 1700s. Um, so so we're going to just have you just kind of pick back up there. You were walking us through the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, particularly the Second Amendment. So just go ahead and pick up there as you were before we lost our connection there.
I apologize. So very quickly, I'll get through this time capsule. The idea was that we had this Second Amendment, and it talked about the right to have a militia. And if you read the context of how it's even drafted, it's referring back when it talks about the right to bear arms. It's referring back to that militia, and it's referring to that state power to have that militia in place. It's interesting that we don't mind there. So that was a right. That was a right given to the states to be able to have that. And so we also have rights as it relates to different signs or different laws we have in our society, and we don't have an issue with those laws. We recognize that those laws help to govern and help society function. If you ever watch someone running a red light intersection, they have to stop some and let others go, and then others have to stop so others can go. And it's just how society functions and can continue to move and have some kind of interaction with one another without having there be catastrophic results. And so I don't mind when I'm going through a certain neighborhood and, Officer Hunt, it says children at play, and it asks me to reduce my speed. there's no one getting in my car pressing my brake. There's no one who's turning my ignition off to make sure I can't continue to move forward. They're simply putting a sign up and asking me to reduce my speed. And in the event that I don't, I may see some of our city's finest who will see to it that next time I'll pay more attention to making those adjustments in my life and my lifestyle. We are okay with it in that regard. If I go to a store to get some my favorite vegan food, I'll wait in line, right? And I'll wait to be seated, and I'll do these things, and I'll eat the meal. I know after I eat the meal, I have to pay for the meal. But for some reason, when this discussion comes up, we become real resistant to there being any manner of rules or governance or anything of that nature that somewhat dictates how things ought to be. And I believe that that is where we're running into a serious problem, because we don't mind laws in other aspects of our lives. But when it comes to, when we talk about gun control or gun reform, it becomes extremely resistant. And it creates a lot of just animus from either side. The discussion can't even be had. And I'll say this, and I'm going to defer now. And it's very interesting. I'm going to say something very controversial, then I'll defer, right? So watch what I do now. So, we talk about the rights, and we talk about wanting to make sure we preserve gun rights. And in the same breath, we're here having the conversation about pro-life and abortion rights. And so the idea is that we will put these laws in place to protect those individuals who can't protect themselves. Well, the argument's being made that there are some laws that need to be implemented to protect individuals who potentially can't protect themselves. Again, you brought up the school shooting. You talk about the grocery stores, things of that nature. And so regardless of where you sit or where you stand, if you will, on abortion rights or abortion law or laws against it, and the Supreme Court kind of, taking a stance, whether it was official, whether someone leaked it, however that goes, their discussions on gun regulation seem to be extremely at odds with those individuals' discussions concerning abortion rights. And I think we need to be able to reconcile some of those discussions and kind of figure out where we're trying to go and how we're going to get there. I don't know if that was vague enough or just completely fuzzy enough for everyone to follow.
I'd like to agitate a little bit before Officer Hunt jumps in, if I may. Is that okay? Can I agitate this a little bit? So I don't have. I'm not dug in on those other debates that the abortion, et cetera, et cetera. But I could make an argument that a very, very vast distinction can be made between the two from this vantage point. If we go back to the 1700s, and you've got those colonists who decided that they no longer wanted the tyranny, their words, tyranny of British government, of government controlling them. And they wanted to make sure that they did not set up a system where they would once again be held under the thumb of a tyrannical government. So they say, we've got to have some checks and balances in place. One of those checks and balances in place so that we will no longer have despotic leadership, rulership who will take advantage of the people. The people must be able to arm themselves in such a way as to prevent the government from having that same kind of control that the British government once held over them. Now, if that's the case, then to turn around and to then give the government the priority or authority to create laws that govern how they can obtain or use or own that type of a checks and balance, I think that's what probably gives people more pause or more angst in that argument that is very different from an abortion argument. Or whether or not abortion rights are regulated by the government, because this other one says the government is now regulating that thing which gives us some kind of checks and balances to check their power. And I think that's what often separates the kind of control that people are willing to receive from the government, whether it's traffic laws, speeding laws, abortion, those sort of things. This is a very different category of government control when it comes to arms.
Mm.
Does that make any sense? Anybody? Probably nobody, because I know the audience to whom I'm speaking.
Can I jump in real quick and just read something before Officer Hunt responds?
Sure.
He's loving this.
I'm just going to read this, and this is the language from the Second Amendment. Okay, a well-regulated militia, comma, being necessary to the security of a free state, comma, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, comma, shall not be infringed. So, just following grammatical rules, a well-regulated militia, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, shall not be infringed. And so the relationship between the people bearing the arms and having that well-regulated militia, and I think that this is ideal segue to Officer Hunt, who was part of that state
Regulators.
police regulated militia.
You're on mute.
Yeah, we got to get you to hit that mute button for us,
You
Officer
had to
Hunt.
unmute. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, still don't have you yet on my end. He was gonna find a way not to weigh in on this.
I know. He definitely didn't want to talk about this. You got to unmute yourself, Jeff.
Should be a little microphone right next to your self view in the bottom left-hand corner. Okay, you see it there.
It shows me on my side that you have muted, so you have to unmute.
I think he's mouthing that he is. He says, "I am," is what I
Okay.
see.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. All right.
So while that's happening, Jason, I'm not quite sure that I got what you were hitting at there, particularly with the issue with. So you're saying that the militia, that the right to bear arms, you're suggesting that is directly connected to a militia.
A well-regulated
Because
militia, correct?
That argument, right? That the only people who have the right to bear arms per the Constitution, per the Second Amendment, are people that are a part of a well-regulated militia.
Correct. And I'm not suggesting that I'm not looking in that narrow scope, but I'm looking at the intent of the amendment at the time as it's coming out of that Revolutionary War and what they were trying to ensure that the states had the right to still be able to maintain. And so, I as they were going through the Bill of Rights, it was less of, and it's going to sound weird, it wasn't pointing so much to the individuals. It was more so looking at the states to be able to still feel as though they don't have big government. And you talked about the tyrannical kind of feel and experience. And so I use the examples, and obviously recognizing that there's many distinctions, but I'm looking at just the fact that we are a society that accepts and understands what rules and what certain ordinances, how they play into us being able to function. But for whatever reason, when it comes to this discussion, it's seen as though if there's a rule in place, you are infringing on my freedoms and trying to strip away the things that are
Can you hear me now?
yes, are just inherent in our functioning. And what I'm saying is that a rule doesn't take away your freedom. It just simply defines how, in fact, you can carry that out. That's all I was getting at.
Okay. Can you guys hear me now?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
You guys
All right,
went all
now.
over the place. You guys went
It's
all
on
over
you
the
now.
place. All right, I'm going to try to take it apart now. And we talked about the Second Amendment rights. We talked about the Constitution. We talked about the right to bear arms. I don't get that deep inside these debates because the simple fact of the matter, we'll be talking about this for another 3 weeks to maybe 3 months. The fact of the matter is, I'm a child of the 60s. And of course, we had the civil rights was enacted in 1964. Some folks can might tell me, some folks they actually understood the assignment, and there's some folks still, based on 1964, still don't understand the assignment. The assignment. What I'm saying is this: the government has so many different loopholes that's going through. One person put down, why does an 18-year-old uh, have the opportunity to get an AR-15? It's unbeknownst to me, because there's always been people that follow rules and people that don't follow the rule. It always boils down to me to personal protection, because as Councilor Jason said, a stop sign to stop. If you stop, there's some people that stop and obey the law, and some people don't. And no matter what you put together in the Constitution, no matter what you put together in these laws, there's always going to be folk that's going to find a loophole in order to get their hands on these guns. Because remember, I'm a retired cop. Everybody that I dealt with, they were arrested, they had illegal guns. There's always going to be a way. The issue is, how do we protect ourselves from individuals that have these AR-15s and different guns? Because there are a lot of them already out there. How do we get folks that have beautiful background checks, and all of a sudden, unfortunately, they start to deal with mental illness while they legally were able to obtain these guns? Now they have mental illnesses or mental disappointments, and now all of a sudden they go these rampages. It always boils down to, no matter what the laws are set up to be, what are you going to do, or what should you do in order to have the different tools to protect yourself and your family? It's always going to boil down to why does anybody need an assault rifle? For what reason? For what reason? So when we start going down to the Constitution and what should be allowed and this loophole and longer checks, I don't really get in those debates because I try to bring it straight to home. Straight to home is, no matter what they're doing, what are we doing as individuals collectively for our families, for our churches, for our schools? What are we doing? And it always boils down to our own personal decisions in terms of our own protection. They're going to go back and forth on this debate. They've been doing it for the last 20, 30 years. How much of it has changed? Always going to boil down to, I own 5 guns. I have 5 weapons. Last week, I went to the range and I shot rounds. Why? Because, as Pastor Paul said earlier, where do you go that's safe in case something happens? You don't have a chance to really defend yourself. What am I gonna walk around with a book in the Constitution and I'm gonna aim that at somebody trying to harm myself or my family? What am I gonna do? It always boils down to you and your personal outlook on safety and how you believe that you're going to protect your family. The counselor has a license to practice law. Okay, but how many people don't respect lawyers unless he goes to an environment everybody respects him as a lawyer? It always boils down to there's always going to be somebody rebellious, people with mental illness, people on the dark web kind of trying to follow up on what the last person did. You can ban these different assault rifles. You can ban it. You can ban it. And okay, now somebody just said, well, are you banning our religious rights and religious liberty? No, I believe that everybody has the right to protect themselves. That's my stance on this. So in terms of the Second Amendment, should we do that? But at the end of the day, when you're walking down trying to come to house, what tools do you have inside your house to protect your wife and your children?
Good discussion. A lot of a
Try
lot
and get
of
a
that a lot of that, I know you seem to be cutting in and out, but a lot of that comes down to what we're realizing. At least for me, let me just speak for me. I have not been one to carry a gun, to shoot a gun. I have friends who would say, "Hey, come, let's go to the range," but it really hasn't caught on. But I have to be honest with you, I am rethinking that because of these things that are happening in society. But I'm not sure I am prepared to be, like it used to be that back in the day in the Wild Wild West, where everyone will carry just in case. That's the thinking that comes to my mind when it comes to my ability to carry and my ability to protect myself. But as a Christian, we've always,
And I agree.
taught turn the other cheek. We've always taught about, don't be the aggressor. Those kinds of things we are teaching our folks, young and old. But we don't really arm them per se. But how are we to deal with the issues now in light of the society that we're living in? How are we as Christians, Seventh Day Adventist Christians, do we get involved in some of the debates? We talked about we were conscientious objectors when it came to war, and now the question is, do we want to go to war, or do we want to be armed even in our neighborhoods? That doesn't sit well with me. Could someone help me kind of weigh that out or work that out?
What do you do when
Anyone?
they say God will be your shield and your protection?
Well, let's go. Let's go to the word of God. Can you guys hear me? Can you hear me?
You're
Real
cutting
choppy.
in and out.
Can you guys hear
You're
me?
choppy, but
You
yeah,
hear me?
here we go. You're normalized now.
No, I think he's
Okay,
still
can you hear
choppy.
me? Okay, good. So 1 Peter 5:8 says, minded. Why that? Okay, verse 8 says, be sober minded, be watchful. The adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring, seeking he may devour. Luke 11:21 says, when a strong man fully armed guards his own his good. Guys hear me? Psalm, Psalms 82, verse 2 and me, deliver them from the hand of the wicked. And Psalms 18, he trained my hands for war, so my arm can bend. How many of those verses did you guys hear?
I heard
Hello?
the
Not very
first
many.
one.
Very choppy.
Hello? Did you hear any of the verses that I said?
We picked up the
Did you
first
hear
one.
anything?
We heard some of them.
Hello. Okay, so here's the second one. Okay, so here's the second one. Luke 11, verse 21. When a strong man fully armed guards his own palace, his goods are safe. You guys got that one?
Got
Mhm.
it. Got it.
Yes? No?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And then Psalms 82, verse 4. Okay. Rescue the weak and the needy, deliver them from the hand of the wicked. And lastly, Psalms 18:34. He trains my hands for war so that my arms can bend a bow of bronze. So
Mm.
this is straight out of the word. This is out of the word. I'm not an advocate for violence, but I've trained. I've trained over the years physically. I've trained over the years for dealing with certain individuals because when you're out in the city of New York and you're dealing with certain people, it's a little difficult to say a prayer when somebody's aiming a gun at you. It's a little difficult when you call 911 and somebody's trying to get inside your house. You're not calling an Adventist. You're not calling a Baptist. You're not calling a Catholic. You're calling a police officer to come and resolve your need. So when you ask me about these different things, I've been out on the forefront. I've dealt with murderers. I've dealt with people that mean you harm. And even in your church, you have folks that have disagreements with other folk. You have husbands and wives that are at odds. You have one elder that may have gotten just a little bit too close to another elder's wife. You got all types of issues. So we're not just talking about stuff in the world. We're talking about even inside of our church. What are we doing as a church to harden these different targets? And the church was once a soft target because everybody knew that folk that went inside the church was in the church to get closer to God. There's no more rules about going to churches and God. Everybody thought about schools at one point. There's innocent children. No, not the children. There's no more rules anymore. So who are we waiting on to give us the go to actually defend ourselves? And if if you get a gun passed away, that doesn't mean you have to be violent. That doesn't mean all of a sudden it's time for you to bring your church and protect the church folks, because you have to be properly trained. I've been shooting a weapon for almost 30 years. So you need folk that are trained, and that's going to open up a whole different discussion that are on your church grounds, outside your church grounds, to protect you. But what do we do? We've been talking about the same thing for the last 30 years. What are we going to do? What are we going to do?
Those are some very fascinating and interesting points that you bring up, particularly with the textual background there. I'll add a couple more as we kick this over to Elder Tracey. The role of the church. What do we do? How to respond to these things? There's one aspect of the church, or one leg of the church. And when I say church, I'm using that generically in the Christian church, not just Seventh-day Adventism, but there are people who say that, and I saw it in the text earlier, that any infringement on civil rights is simply a gateway to an infringement on religious rights or religious liberties, civil liberties, religious liberties. Some mix those things in, and so they say that the role of the church is to stand up for people's rights to bear arms. There's another leg of the church that says our role is to be good neighbors, and as good neighbors, we're concerned about our children's safety in our community, in our neighborhoods, in our schools. And if this is a way to protect them, then the same way that we got up and marched in the streets for civil liberties and civil rights, the same reason that the church ought to be vocal and have a voice in getting up and marching to curb the violence, but no matter what other means are, whether it's legal means in terms of gun control, whether it's other means, should the church stay silent on the sidelines, or should we have two other texts I'd like to add to what Officer Hunt mentioned. Job, the man who was perfect and upright in all his ways. Bible says when he saw the wicked going through the streets, he would get up and he smashed the teeth of the wicked. He was violent in his pursuit of justice. Jesus in Luke chapter 22, he says, look, the time is now come. This is your red letter edition. This isn't somebody talking about Jesus. This is Jesus. The time has come for you to now go and sell your cloak and buy a sword. This is Jesus saying it's time to go get strapped up. What are we telling the church today, Elder Tracey, when it comes to these issues of safety?
Something very interesting. We had recently, I say recently, just before the pandemic hit, we had to take a position as it relates to having law enforcement at the church and having security in the church, not off-site, not across the street, but literally in the church, in the foyer. And so there were individuals who were very against that. And the idea was, how dare we bring weapons, if you will, into the house of God? And it becomes an attack on your faith and how you're perceiving God's ability to be able to protect. And I think it may have come right out of the shooting in South Carolina when we end up having some of those discussions. But I'll say this, David, when he fought Goliath, he was very clear. He says, you come to me with a sword and a shield and all that. I come to you in the name of the Lord. He slays Goliath. But what does he do? Knocks him down, gets up on his torso, takes out Goliath's sword, chops off Goliath's head, holds up his head, and then takes the sword and the armor and brings it back to his little tent and kind of keeps it there.
Savage.
While David is on the run from Saul, what does he do? He goes to the temple, right? And he asks the priest, "Do you have anything here?" And he gets the sword from that temple that he has to use as he's moving forward. So I don't have any opposition whatsoever as it relates to some of the texts that were read a moment ago or recited a moment ago. What I will say is this: we have to be careful. And Pastor Paul, you brought this point up. We have to be careful about being a church in a generic sense who speaks out only on certain issues and remains quiet and silent on other issues that are equally, if not more important. Because when we do that, what we're saying is we care for a certain segment, if you will, and not the others. Last thing I'll say is, a lot of times in life, and this has been a bit of my mantra now, a lot of times in life, we use this phrase where we say, "I want to be a voice for the voiceless." And I believe, Officer Hunt, you'll agree with me in this. I'm more of the opinion that we ought to help the voiceless find their own voice. Because when you do that, as opposed to you speaking for them, they can actually say what it is they want to say. And if we as a church, the safeguards, if you will, if we would empower and allow the Spirit of God to use us to infuse the community around us, we would have a much better perception, if you will, by the masses. A lot of the comments that are coming in, a lot of discussion we're having is centered around, gun control. But some of the individuals are coming up and they're saying, well, wait a second, how do you have a child who has absolutely no regulation and they have all these weapons in their room? How did your child have time to draft a 500-page manifesto and you had no idea what was going on? And so if we start looking at some of that, now I'll say this. In Texas, we had a child, because someone brought up the fact that the ages of these parents are too young to be able to raise their children. We had a grandmother get shot in the head before her grandson left home and entered into the school. And so there is no regard. There is no longer hands-off. Officer Hunt, you hit the point on the head. There's no longer a hands-off when it comes to certain areas or certain places or certain individuals. The heart of man and woman and child has waxed cold. And so we have to be able to empower and give individuals the insight so that they can begin to speak out and begin to carry themselves in such a way where they can do what is necessary to not just survive, but to thrive. And if we can help with that as a church, then we've actually fulfilled our purpose and the mission.
I love that. I love that. And I'm gonna take it a step further, right? Because we talk about a community of safety. We talk about empowering those around us. A lot of that has to do with us training. Now, you spoke about some possible security measures that you put in place at your church. What a lot of folk don't understand is security starts outside the church. It starts way outside before folk even get inside of your church. If I was to be idealistic, I would say the smartest thing to do is set up an outer perimeter of some sort of safety officer way before he even gets towards the entrance of the church, before he even gets it. Of course, locking the different doors, having different deacons, officers at different doors, training for the unarmed, security training for the church collectively, active shooter training, churches having a safety plan of doing different tests of it if something happens. How's the church operating together as a family? How is everybody thinking? Get everybody to think on the same level, to respond on the same level, so we don't have to have guesswork. If I'm with you three distinguished gentlemen and we've all been trained the same way over and over, I know what you're going to do. You know what I'm going to do. We're going to do it together, because at the end of the day, you can discuss this all you want, but unless there's some sort of training in place, unless there's a security plan or a safety plan that your church members know, as well as your local law enforcement, how are you going to get anything done? All that's going to happen is hysteria. And one of the things that makes training so powerful is if you train over and over in something, You start to develop a confidence through repetition. You start to understand how if we do this over and over, you're not in that much of a shock. And if God forbid something happens, everybody starts to perform as one body. And then when you have all those different things in place, you get to you get to have more time. Because the most important thing when a dangerous situation happens, how do you create more time? How do you create more time for you all to save more people, to reduce carnage, to reduce injuries? How do you do it? Then you come down to that whole mindset of run, hide, fight. All these different things have one thing in common. It establishes the opportunity for you to gain more time to save lives, to get out of a dangerous situation. And I hate to tell you, and I hate to say this, but in some to most active shooter situations, you're gonna have carnage. The question is, how do you reduce it? Are you going to have as many? So the more training in security, the more trained officers, the more trained officers outside of the church, the more trained officers inside of the church, the more is your ability to reduce carnage. And at the end of the day, at this at this level, training is paramount.
Mhm. So what
I,
I'm
I, I
hearing.
don't I don't think folks.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead. No,
No,
you
no.
go ahead.
I was going to say, from what I'm hearing from you, from what I'm hearing now, in light of my question, it's not a sense of just getting the gun or the weapon or the. It's also being sensible enough to get the training in those things so that you can use them, and know when to use them. And I do appreciate that. Um, Today has been truly a tough day technically for us, and but I want to ask this question as we begin to probably have to wrap this up a little bit because of our time. But what actually, from our perspective, would you share? I'm going to ask Jason to share in his specialty field, especially protecting children. What would you share with our viewers as some of the key things, especially in light of today? You, as a chief legal counsel for an organization that protects children, what would you say we need to keep in mind in developing a plan or developing some safety rules for our children today?
I'm going to say this. Thank you so much, Pastor Wade. And, one of the things that I've looked at, much of the discussion that we hear, and I'm going to make sure I zone in on what you're asking, but I just want to make sure that I can just speak to this. Much of the discussion that we hear in the political arena, it comes from individuals that don't face the same obstacles as the constituents that they serve.
Mm,
Wow. Wow.
So
That's you.
these schools, these schools that are under attack, these churches, these areas, and Officer Hunt, you talked about, the soft target aspect of it and setting up a perimeter. We don't get the perimeters. We don't get we don't get that type of individuals who are trained to help disarm or diffuse situations or to lower and reduce the number of carnage. We're at the public school with a public resource officer perhaps, and you're fully exposed. You go to an independent school, you go to a private school, man, you pull up, there's retired FBI agents who are serving in security. I'm not making this up. I'm not speculating. I'm speaking about what I know, what I've seen, what I've experienced. And while they are there, they have their sidearm there. The children see them every day. There is a certain method to getting into the school. There's a gate there. It's locked. It's secure. There's a camera. You have to hit a code, and they'll see whoever's. You can't just come on campus. When they go to
And they
church,
got
they're
active
not going to
arms.
church like you and I. They're not just coming with a hymnal and a Seventh-day Adventist a hymnal in the Bible. They have security detail. They have individuals who've already swept the hard target. They are a hard target. And I think one of the things we have to recognize is that we are not. And so if we can start having that real discussion that you're going out, you're fully exposed, the first question we opened this segment up with was, what do we consider safety? Right? How do you define and characterize safety, and what does that look like for you? It is very different. And if you live the lifestyle that is protected, that is entitled, and that where the Second Amendment works best for you, I can guarantee you that you will have a different perspective than you have today. Because the idea is, and I'm going to say this, and it's going to sound terrible. What you want to disarm is their safety net. And so, as you talk and you speak against this idea of this gun control, things of that nature, you're talking about disarming their safety net. That's just not going to happen. So how do you meet that? You have to meet it by figuring out what they're doing to make sure that they feel comfortable in their space. We're talking about restricted access. We're talking about those things that they put around themselves. So to speak to your question and to hone in on that, Pastor Wade, it's about teaching children exactly what their level of exposure is, why they have the level of exposure that they have, and how they can reduce that exposure as well.
Okay.
And so it's about having that real discussion and not making it seem as though, no, just pray. Just pray and here's your exposure. And yes, you pray for discernment and direction, but you have to watch and pray with action as well.
Wow. Okay. Thank you.
Elder, I'm sorry, I know where our time is well spent, but Elder, is there also any level of that training or education or inculcation of that information that should go towards the people who are entrusted with the care of those children?
Most definitely,
The
Pastor
adult.
Paul, and I'm glad you spoke to that. Most definitely. We're talking about foster parents. We're talking about group homes, and those places where these children who are in the care of the state, they end up. There really needs to be an emphasis on safeguarding those premises. Keep in mind, these are children oftentimes who are coming out of horrid situations and exposure levels that are through the roof. And if we are not giving adequate training, but we're paying bare minimum wage, and we have individuals who are going in who don't have the slightest clue about how to, you have a home with children. Number one, that's highly volatile. But number two, you're exposed to the masses. And if you don't have things in place to safeguard and keep them in a place where they can actually grow, and again, it's right now we're dealing with survival mode. I would love for us to be able to transition to a thriving mode, right? But we're not even there yet. But how do we do that when we are disarming, if you will, that environment for those individuals to even make it to the next level, to the next step? And so I know that as we hear Officer Hunt speaking to it, it seems so radical, it seems so off the charts. But the truth of the matter is, we actually need that. And I saw someone put in the chat earlier in the comments that they appreciate Officer Hunt for causing and making their camping experience what it was because of the safety that they felt and that safety net. And I'll say this and I'm done. The idea, you talked about child net, and the idea is that you want to have a safety net. A trapeze artist knows they'll have a safety net just in case, right? And so if we don't have that net as secure as possible, we are failing. We are failing. We have failed.
Wow. Officer Hunt, what can you add to helping us understand what our personal safety, what can we do to help bolster that?
I think I'm gonna close with two words: awareness of your environment, awareness of every environment you go to, teaching your children awareness, and at some point, even as close families, have family training. For example, if Pastor Paul was in the store with his children, and one of his children saw something and said, "Daddy, that don't look right. Something don't look right." He's not the pastor. Pastor Paul's not the only eyes. His children looking out also. And to take it a step further, every family should have some sort of safety code. For example, Pastor Wade, we know each other for a long time. I never call you by your first. I've never called you Roger, never. But if me and you are constantly moving together in an environment as friends or family, and I call you Jeff, that's the code word. If I call you Jeff and you well know that your name ain't Jeff, that automatically should spark some sort of connection to some sort of awareness of something's not right. When I go out with my kids, we have a word with, and if I say a certain word with my children, they already know what it means because you never know. So the awareness first starts at home. First starts at your family, and that mindset will start to translate to all your family and your friends and your church members and your coworkers. Awareness is the key because it's no longer a single problem. And if everybody is aware, the more eyes, as simple as driving when you're in the car, like with my son. Today I was dropping him off at church and he automatically knows sitting in the car, Dad, watch your right. I'm teaching him how to drive. He in the passenger seat and he's telling me to watch my right or watch my left because I've already trained my children while they're in the car to be aware of the surroundings because Daddy could get distracted. So there's a second backup. So that mindset of awareness is the number one thing. And then whatever training you have, whatever personal training you have, or whatever professional training your church environment needs, you should actually reach out to the trained professionals to make sure that that becomes a reality. And it doesn't have to be a big time thing. It has to be basic training and basic awareness. And collectively, if 1,000 eyes are on what's going on around us, you can see most things happen way before they become a surprise.
It's good stuff. That's good stuff.
I mean,
Yeah. So,
it really brings to light what New
yeah,
York City's mantra is: see something, say something.
yeah, yeah. Good. Well, listen, gentlemen, we have been blessed by you joining us today. We know that we didn't really get through concisely everything because of some of the technical difficulties that we've had today, which makes me want Roger to invite these gentlemen back, and so that we can have a full discussion flowing all the way through so that our audience can get the maximum benefit from the expertise and the experience that these gentlemen bring to the table. So we'll have to have that talk and see where we land on that. But Attorney Tracey, Officer Hunt, thank you so very much for your contribution to this discussion today. Thank you so much for your contribution to this issue of safety throughout your careers. And we want you to know here at the Pastors Roundtable, we are grateful for the service that you provide to our children, to our communities, to our conferences, to our camporees, all of those things that you have contributed to in the past. And we just continue to pray God's blessing and his safekeeping around you and your families. I see people in the chat saying, yes, part two. Would love to continue this discussion. Thank you, guys. Yeah, I think it's definitely something that we've
Yeah,
got to spend some more time with, because unfortunately, as Elder Tracy, you brought up the text that says that the love of many will wax cold. Um, Unfortunately, there's something that lets us know that things are going to get worse before they get better. And we've got to be in a position to be able to do the best that we can to protect those around us with every means that we have. If you have not, again, if you've not subscribed to a Pastors Roundtable YouTube channel, we want to invite you to do that. If we do get to reshoot this one, we may just send it straight to the YouTube channel. So keep an eye out for that. You'll get notice of that, if not only when you subscribe to the YouTube channel, but you also click that little bell. And so you will get notice directly anytime we add new content to our YouTube channel. Again, we are, go ahead, Elder Tracy.
Yeah, I just want to make sure you called me Attorney Tracey. I didn't know if that was our safe word. You never called me that before, Pastor Paul. So I'm just making sure. Are you okay? Are you okay? I'm just checking in there in Georgia. Okay, all right, just checking on you. Thank you.
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you.
yep.
Thank
Didn't know that was
you.
our new safe word.
Hey, there was a training. Thank you, Officer Hunt, for training us there today. There's
Yeah,
something simple
yeah.
as that. We do appreciate it. Listen, we just hope, we knew we had technical issues, but we just hope the little bit that we have shared today has added to your toolbox to feel
Amen.
safe on what's happening around in the community. We will have a part two again to our viewers. Thank you so much for
Amen.
joining us today, for putting up with our technical issues, and
Hanging
we
in
look
there.
forward to having these gentlemen come back. I'm very much excited to talk a little more about understanding the rules, how the rules work, and how some of these things are looked at. I love the practicality that is brought out. So we look forward to having that discussion again. Want to say on behalf of our third colleague, Dr. Henry, he is in the midst of doing some training there for family ministries, and he couldn't be with us today. So we thank him for allowing us to go forth. We look forward to having him back with us next week.
All right. Shall I do this time, Raj?
You started
We're
off,
going to
and I'll
ask
finish.
our guests to stay by for just a moment, and we thank each of you and our audience today for joining us here at the Pastors Roundtable, where we endeavor to do our very best to help you keep ministry relevant
Resourced.
and real. God bless everybody. Take care.